First of all, you have in front of you a depressed elderly man, however, with a smiling face. This is because I have worked for sustainable development for 40 years, and it is obviously in vain. The world is less sustainable now than when I started this hard work 40 years ago. This failure doesn't really tell us that we should stop working for the cause of sustainability. We have to keep fighting, and I guess the only difference is that we ought to learn from all we have done wrong over the last 40 years so that the next 40 years can become somewhat better. 40 years ago, my friends and I wrote The Limits to Growth. The important thing about the Limits to Growth book was that at the time, in 1972, we did not know enough to be able to tell which of those 12 futures was the most likely one. And as a consequence, the Limits to Growth only contained very general conclusions, like the type that the planet is small, we cannot grow for another 100 years without difficulty, that overshoot is likely, namely that our pet institutions of democracy and capitalism would certainly allow the global system to expand beyond the sustainable carrying capacity of the globe. And then finally, we made a simple statement that once you have allowed world population and economy to grow into an unsustainable situation, there is only one way out, namely down, either through planned decline or through a collapse in the market or by nature. We are in overshoot. We also know so much, I think, at this point in time, that it is now possible to move one step ahead from the scenario analysis to actually making a forecast, to tell what will actually happen in the future. My forecast is described in a book that appeared last year as a report to the Club of Rome, commemorating the 40-year anniversary of the first book, the Limits to Growth book. It has appeared now in a number of languages. The interesting thing is the website, the book website, www.2052.info, where the tens of thousands of numbers and equations and spreadsheets and the whole schmear is available if you're interested. And let me go very quickly through the global forecast. When your spouse asks you tomorrow, what did he say? This is what he said. He said that the world population and economy will grow more slowly towards 2052 than most people expect, but still fast enough, sadly, to trigger a climate crisis. And consumption will stagnate because the world society will have to spend ever more on repair and adaptation. And for those who have read The Limits to Growth, this is essentially that the future will resemble scenario number 2 out of those 12 scenarios from 1972. In other words, what will happen over the next 40 years is that global growth will stop, or at least slow down, and it will do so by itself. The population growth will stop, not because of wise policy, but because the women of the world will choose to have fewer children, both in the rich and in the poor world. And then the economy will also grow ever slower, not because we are not trying to make the economy grow. You look around these days and you see exactly what we will be seeing over the next 40 years. And the irritating thing is that this slowing down will occur just so slowly that we manage to trigger a climate problem in the process. So the accumulated emissions from this slowing global economy will be sufficient, to drive us above the +2 degrees centigrade and into uncertain territory. And it is important that this slowing growth, of course, has the totally obvious side effect that there will be many more poor people in 2040, both in the rich world, but particularly in the poor world, than most people think. The green line is us. Actually, it's you, less Norway. So Norway is, of course, Norway cannot be used for any purposes in an overview. So this is you. And it's essentially the same as the United States, except a little better. So stable average incomes over the next 40 years instead of a decline. Why? not so mature as the United States, so it's still possible to copy some of the solutions the Americans have done. No big debt to the Chinese, which is an advantage in this case. And then finally, although our decision systems or systems of governance aren't perfect, they are at least capable of making decisions every now and then. You know, so we are better than the Americans on reaching some kind of actionable decision. The red line is the winner. These are the Chinese. The average Chinese will be 5 times as rich in 2050 as he or she is at this point in time. And so the average Chinese will more or less be like the average European when we get to 2050. How is this possible? This is possible because of the perfect alignment of the interests of the Chinese people and the Communist Party of China. Both are dead set on getting rich as fast as possible, and since it is possible, it will happen. It is important to make the point that this is not a rosy future. Many people look at this and say, since there are no bumps on the curves, they think that everything is fine. This is not nice for rather big groups of the world population. And this is irritating to a person like I, who has been spending so much time on trying to achieve a sustainable world. Because, of course, I know that it is technically possible to create a very much better world. You know, and it's particularly the climate crisis that could so easily be handled. All we need to do is to shift roughly 2% of the labor and capital of the world from dirty sectors to clean sectors. The problem is, of course, that since the clean solutions are slightly more expensive than the dirty solutions, we don't do this. Because, of course, we choose always the cheapest solution, and to try to argue in favor of doing something which is more expensive than the cheapest thing normally fails. And fundamental problem why we will create for ourselves such a sad future is human short-termism. Sure, people are willing to make sacrifices with a 5-year horizon. They actually pay a lot of money to go to my school in order to get the hope of a better job 5 years down the line. But they do not sacrifice voluntarily today for an uncertain benefit which is much, much farther down the line. And that's the core problem of the climate crisis, the way I see it. Some optimists say that you're wrong, the market will solve this problem. Capitalism will solve this problem. Well, my view is that that is totally wrong. Capitalism is made in order to allocate capital to the most profitable project, which is the cheapest solution. Other optimists say that this is easy because we just pass regulation. You know, we internalize the externalities, as it's called in economic speak. We put regulations in place which aligns the corporate interest with the societal interest. And I say, good luck. We have spent 20 years now trying to get a carbon price in place, you know, which would do that trick. We have a wonderful system where the short-term nature of the individual is reflected in, again, the petty institutions of democracy and capitalism, keeping it onto an easily predictable set of decisions, which are all in the short-term interest of the nation. And those things that could have been done, the extraordinary action that would have solved the problem, will be rejected fiercely by democracy and capitalism, by short-term human beings. And this is what I'm forecasting, that we will not dump democracy, we will not dump capitalism, and consequently it is fully possible to tell what will happen. And no, I do it the other way around. I tell you what should be done. But then please promise not to waste my time telling me that those things will not happen. I agree with you. So what should happen are 5 things. First of all, we should introduce the one-child family in the rich world. Secondly, we should of course ban the use of coal, oil, and gas. Thirdly, instead of doing all the well-intended development work that we are doing, we should take those few billion that we are actually sending to the poor world and use it all to build a low-carbon energy system in the third world. Fourthly, you know, in order to handle the short-term nature of the human being, I think the only approach would be to establish a supranational institution that actually tells the nation state how much CO2 the nation state is allowed to emit. And then, since I'm at it, you know, one should at least add number 5, which is basically, since we know that incomes in the rich world will not grow over the next 40 years, why not we use this opportunity to change the stupid goal of society, which is to increase, you know, purchasing power for us stinking rich individuals, you know, rather go for something which is achievable and much more sustainable, namely, you know, seeking a higher well-being as a societal goal in a situation where the population is stable and where the income is stable. This is easily doable if you start thinking about it. It's just that most people have never thought about it. I should end repeating, of course, that I don't like what I see, although I presented with a smile in order to make you not go asleep. This is, of course, not the type of future that you would have gotten if you elected me as your dictator. But this is the future that you will get, you know, and that's, so the only hope I have is, of course, that by being sufficiently arrogant and irritating, you know, I might kick some of you into starting working on those extraordinary actions that are necessary in order to get the world off the forecast, off my forecast. Thank you very much.